Okay, good morning. Okay, our learning is Ilay Nishmas Mendel, Mariam Bas Kalman Ruvain. We are going to be discussing more about carrying different items regarding animals. Okay, so we are on Nun Beis Amud Aleph, Tana Devei Menashia, and okay, so again, one of the things we discussed yesterday was excessive carrying, like what the status of this with excessive carrying. In other words, you have the regular type of leash, the regular type of restraint that an animal is carried with, is moved along with, and that everyone agrees is fine. That's not carrying. We did have a debate about things which are considered extra, like more than the norm. If that's an issue, that's not an issue. We saw two opinions about that. So the other thing which we have not yet seen, which is going to play a role not only with animals but also with human beings, is if there are things which it's likely it's going to come off. Things where there's a concern that it's likely it's going to come off, there we're going to have a discussion about a number of different applications of that, about whether or not there's an issue of even carrying that, even when you don't take it off. You know, a practical example that comes up with human beings is gloves. You know, so there's discussion about wearing gloves without an eruv. Why? Because there's a concern. It's appropriate to take your glove off when you shake someone's hand, and therefore, are you going to take the glove off? Or other things where there's a big chance that the thing's going to come off, or that you're going to want to take it off. Is there going to be an issue? So we're going to go through a number of examples, but here we're still talking about animals. We'll see one example by animals. So Tana Devei Menashia, Nun Beis Amud Aleph. It is. Yeah, like 4 lines down. 4 lines down. Tana Devei Menashia. Okay, it was learned in the base medrash of Menashia. Ez shechakak la ben karnea yotzer ba'afsar b'Shabbos. A goat who carved holes between the horns of the goats is allowed to go out with a halter on Shabbos. So a halter, again, is kind of like a halter, a thing around the person's neck. But over here, it's attached through the holes of the horn. Why is it attached to the holes of the horn? Because otherwise it's very easy for it to fall off the goat. So basically it's a way of you can't really pull it off if you bored holes through the horns, it's not going to fall off. So that everyone agrees is okay. However, by Rabbi Yosef asked the following question. Tachaf lab is, obviously the implication is if it's just around the neck, there's a concern it's going to fall off. Okay, goats jump up and down, they're a little wild, there's a concern it's going to come off. However, Tachaf lab is a kana mahu. What if the halter was supported by the goat's beard? Okay, the goat has a very thick beard. Let's say it was stuck in the beard. So kevan dimanatach la kaivla. Do we say that since if the goat pulls it out, it hurts? Okay, he's going to pull out the goat's hair, right? It's kind of really stuck into the hair, and therefore, therefore it's not going to pull it out. Lo yaslan tucha. It's not going to cut loose. Odilma zimnin zerafi v'nafel. Sometimes you're right. It's not going to pull it off, but sometimes the halter is going to come loose and it's going to fall off by itself. Then the person, the owner, is going to go along and say, "Oh, the halter fell off. I want to pick it up," and therefore they're going to end up carrying on Shabbos. So again, if it's placed firmly, i.e., between the horns, everyone's going to agree that's fine. The question is, if it's in the beard, on the one hand, it's hard to pull out. It's going to hurt the animal to pull out, and therefore the animal's going to make sure not to pull it out. At the same time, it could just fall out on its own, and therefore you might come to a situation where the owner is going to carry it. What's the halacha? Are you allowed to go out? Is the goat allowed to go out with a halter in its beard? Teku, we do not have an answer to that question. Okay, it's not hasam. We learned in the Mishnah.
What do we do? Let's see a note. Do we prosecute that would be a problem?
I don't know. If it comes up, I'll look into it for you. I promise. I'm just kidding. I don't know. I really don't know. Usually, if it's a situation like this, it's we're talking about, Isser D'Oraisa, potentially we probably go L'chumra, but I don't know. I don't know offhand how we pass. I really don't know. I'm sorry. I should.
I saw some notes, so I'm like, where do we go?
Yeah, I don't know. I should. Okay, it's not hasam. We learned in the Mishnah. A cow's not allowed to go with a strap between its horns. Now, the strap is going to help, with the carrying, causing it to travel as well. A strap, by definition, again, there's different levels of leashes, and a strap would seem to be a little bit extra. It's not like you could typically take a cow out with just a little cord around its neck, and that would be sufficient. Having a strap and then having something attached to it, that's already a little bit much. That's considered excessive. That's considered extra. And so we're going to come back to this machlokes, it would seem, about extra carrying versus non-extra carrying. Let's see. Amar Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba. Pligi bar Rav Shmuel. Regarding this Mishnah that said it cannot go with the strap between its horn, there is a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Chad Amar ben Lanai ben l'shamer aser. One says that whether the strap is for decoration or it's to control the cow, it's going to be forbidden. V'chad amar l'nai aser u'l'shamer mutter. And the other one says that for decoration it's going to be aser, okay? But for protection, for controlling it, it is permitted. Okay, so again, everyone's going to agree this strap on Shabbos is going to be problematic. It would seem that it might fall down, and therefore, you're going to have this decoration is going to be a big discussion when it comes to human beings, right? Like you have jewelry, right? What type of jewelry is allowed? Is it going, is it the fact that it's for decoration alone, the fact that it's for aesthetic purpose alone is not an issue, but there's some types of jewelry which might come off, person might take it off, it might fall off, there's going to be an issue. So for the cow, everyone's going to agree if the strap is being worn for decoration, can't travel, right? Can't go out on Shabbos. If it's being used for to control it, in other words, to help guide it, then one opinion says yes, one opinion says no. We don't know yet which one, Rav and Shmuel. One says yes, one says no. And again, the strap, everyone agrees, is considered like more than necessary. So with that in mind, Rav Yosef. Yosef comes along, and he's going to try to figure out who said what. He said, "This time to Shmuel hu Amar l'nai aser l'shamar mutter." He says, it makes sense to say that Shmuel was the one who said that decoration is forbidden, but to use it to schlep the animal, it's permitted. Why? Why do I think that it's Shmuel? Because yesterday we learned a teaching in the name of Shmuel who said the law is like Hanania. What did Hanania teach us? Hanania taught us that excessive, like extra type of care of protection is not considered too much. Right? Yesterday we had the original debate over here about an animal using more than necessary type of protection, type of guidance, and Hanani was the one who said it's permitted, and Shmuel says Allah is like Hanania. So now when the Gemara over here said, when the Bryce over here said that there's an opinion that allows you to have the strap for the sake of controlling the cow, it would seem to be Shmuel, because he holds that opinion that excessive restraint is permitted. Amalei Abai disagrees. He says, no, Adrab, the opposite is true. It's time to Shmuel Hudamar L'Bein L'Nai Ben L'Shamer Aser. It would make sense to say that Shmuel is the one who says for whether it's for decoration or to control the cow, it's forbidden. Why? Damar V'Udamar Shmuel. Because we have the following teaching from Shmuel. Machlif L'Vnei Rabbi, that Shmuel taught that they switched the cases in front of Rabbi. In other words, they asked Rabbi the following question: Shalzo Bezo Mahu. If you give the restraint of one type of animal and you put it on for another type of animal, what's the halacha? In other words, they're asking Rabbi this question: are you allowed to do excessive? Let you take a restraint for an animal that needs a lot and give it to an animal that needs a little. Is that permitted on Shabbos? Same question, yeah. Amar Lefana, exactly. Amar Lefana, Rabbi Shmuel of Rabbi Yossi. And Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yossi, said before Rabbi, Kach Amar Abba. He said in the name of Rabbi Yossi, Arba behemos yotzes ba'afser. 4 animals may go out with a halter. Hasus appeared v'gamal v'chamar. Horse, mule, camel, and donkey. Lav mute gamal v'chatam. And assumption is that statement came to exclude a camel with a nose ring. In other words, a nose ring is extra. And Rav Yossi said this, and basically Rav Yossi said it's forbidden. And this was said in front of Rabbi. And Rabbi, by not disagreeing, seemingly agreed with this ruling. And Shmuel, who quoted this ruling, was clearly holding like this as well. Bottom line is, Shmuel seems to be saying excessive restraint is forbidden on Shabbos. Okay? So the Gemara says, Sameha mekameha. You're right. So basically go ahead and clearly the second statement is good. Ignore the first statement. Okay, now the Gemara is going to question, like when you have 2 contradictory statements, why do you choose one over the other? But at this point, the Gemara is saying, ignore the first statement and go with the second statement saying that Shmuel holds excessive restraint is aser. Ask the Gemara, why did you eliminate this version, this statement in favor of this one? Sameha mekameha, do the opposite. And we'll prove why you should do the opposite. Ashkan Shmuel Huda Amar, because we have a direct statement from Shmuel who says explicitly, L'nai aser, l'shamer mutter, that it is forbidden for beauty, for aesthetic purposes, but to control the cow, it is permitted. De Itmar, we have a statement that says explicitly, whether it was for decoration or to control the cow, it's forbidden. For decoration, forbidden, but to control the cow, it's permitted. And that's how we land, that Shmuel holds, like Hanania explicitly here, that it is allowed for controlling the cow, meaning you could use extra type of protection. Again, the way that'll apply to our animals is if you have a dog and you have to use like the basic, like cheapest type of leash when you're carrying on Shabbos, even if it's a more elaborate contraption, as long as it's being done to control the animal, it is permitted, like Hanania, like Shmuel, and that's how we paskin. Okay, let's go further. Meisvei. Now we're going to challenge Rav, who said that it's forbidden. We're going to say that again, Rav's an Amora. and he can't argue with the Mishnah, right? So we're going to ask on Rav from a Mishnah. The Gemara over here is talking, the Mishnah over here is talking about, the Bryce over here is talking about a para aduma. There is a halacha by a para aduma. Para aduma, again, is that the red heifer, and the red heifer gets killed, and they burn the animal, and the ashes get mixed with water, and they use it for purifying. The halacha is the animal cannot do any burden. In other words, if you have a red heifer, you can't put it to work. Okay, so the Gemara is going to discuss the following case. Kshara ba'aleha b'moser ksher. If the owner ties it to a leash, it is still a kosher. That's not considered work. Now, a cow is not a very wild animal. A cow typically doesn't need a leash. A cow typically just needs a string. A leash is like already like more of a contraption. It just needs something like very, very bare bones, and it does not need a leash. And yet, the Bryce is saying that you are allowed to use extra type of protection, and it's not considered a burden. It's not considered like it went ahead and worked, right? So the Gemara says, if you hold that anything extra is by definition a burden, which is what Rav holds, right? Then Ashalo Ola Aleha Ol Amrachmana, the Torah said that it's not able to have a yoke, meaning it can't do any work, it can't do any burden, and yet it's permitted. So it sounds like we're saying that an extra type of leash is not a burden. Right? This is the question on Rav. Again, even though we're not talking about Hilchos Shabbos here, but we see from this halacha, from this brisa, that even though it's an extra type of leash, it's not considered a burden. Amar Abaye, the Gemara gives three possible reasons. Amar Abaye, b'molicha me'ir le'ir. One answer is that we're leading the cow from city to city. It's true. In your backyard, in your field, on a regular day, you wouldn't use a leash for a cow. But if you're traveling with the cow from one city to the next, then already you're going to use a leash, and that's normal. Again, so it's all going to be contextual. If in that context it's normal to use this type of leash, then of course it's not going to be extra. But maybe the Brisa would say if it was in your backyard and you use a leash, it would be extra, and this would still be consistent with Rav. Alternatively, Rav Amar Shani Para Didameh Yikarin. Maybe it's different, that it's true. Regularly, a string is fine. But since a para aduma is so expensive, I don't know about you, if you had something very expensive, you're going to want to use like the best protection possible. Again, it's contextual. Typically, for a cow, using a leash, it's extra. But in the context of a para aduma, it's not considered extra. Ravina Amar b'moredes. Maybe we're talking about a rebellious cow, a wild cow. For a wild cow, it's going to be normal. The bottom line is this price is not going to be a question on Rav. Okay, now we're going to go back to a quote from a Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Bashir, okay, with a shear was a collar, okay? V'chol bali hashir, and anything that goes with a shear, yotzin b'shir, could go out with a shear. I'm reading the whole quote. The Gemara over here doesn't have the whole quote. Goes out with a collar, and it gets dragged with a collar. I think it's one of the Ger Rebbes say that he has like a homiletic read of this Mishnah. The word shear over here, it's really share. Share is the way to read a leash. To read a collar, but he reads it sheer. He says everything goes out with song. And everything gets dragged out with song. In other words, the person's in a bad place. Put on some music, and it's gonna help you. It's gonna lift you up. Okay, fine. But that's obviously not the pshat. But fine. The point is that anything that goes out with a collar may go out with a collar and is allowed to be pulled with a collar. Now those last phrases, if he's allowed to go out and pulled, that seems a little extra. Like, what's going on? It's allowed to go out with a collar. Okay. What does it mean? Go out with a collar and pulled with a collar. It seems like it's saying two separate things. What does that mean? So the Gemara says, "My yotzin, my nimshachin." What does it mean? It goes allowed to go out and allowed to be pulled. What does that mean? So Amar Rav Huna, o yotzin kruchin, o nimshachin. It could either go wrapped. The collar is allowed to go wrapped around its neck, or it's allowed to be pulled by the leash. What that means is sometimes you'd have like a leash, and what they would do is they would wrap it around the neck. Like almost like a big choker. In other words, they would go ahead and they didn't use it to actually drag the animal, but it was used more for aesthetic purposes. And Rav Huna is saying that's allowed. You don't actually have to go ahead and use it to pull, but even if it was just wrapped around the neck, it would be allowed to be used. Okay? Shmuel Amar yotzin imshachim ve'ein yotzin kruchin. Shmuel says no. Read the Mishnah as saying one statement, that it's allowed to go out and pulled with a collar. In other words, but you can't just have a collar that is wrapped around the neck and not pulled with. That would be forbidden. Okay, so you have a machlokus over here for this collar, this type of, it's a collar which has obviously a string attached to it, which sometimes they would wrap it around the neck. Rav holds you are allowed to go out, the animal's allowed to go out on Shabbos if it's just wrapped around the neck, and Shmuel says no, only if it's being used to pull and not otherwise, okay? The Masnisa Tana, we have a brisa that says, Yotzin kruchin limashech. A brisa says explicitly that the leash has to be wrapped around the neck to be pulled, not like Rav Huna, right? Rav Huna said, even if it's not to be pulled, it seems like the Rishonim say, it seems like Rav Huna never heard this brisa, okay? But nonetheless, the brisa seems to go against Rav Huna. Rav Yosef says, Chazina lehu leigle dve Rav Huna yotzim afsarean kruchim Shabbos. He said, I saw the calves of Rav Huna go with their halters wrapped around their necks. right? So clearly we see Rav Huna, and why are we quoting this? Even though we just saw Rav Huna say this a moment ago, we've seen a number of times, and we'll continuously see, that sometimes you have an Amora saying something, or a Tana say something, or a Rabbi say something, and they are telling you this is the ruling, but they themselves are going to be stringent, right? Meaning, in other words, you can see there's sometimes going to be a distinction, but over here you see Rav Huna himself actually practice this way. Rav Yosef said, I saw Rav Huna's animals going out with their wrapped around their neck. They practice this way, okay? And now we're going to have a couple of teachings we have to organize together. Let's see. The mules of Rebbe would go out their halters on Shabbos, okay? Now, it doesn't say explicitly whether they went with their halters wrapped around or they went out with them being used to drag them, to carry them. When it says they went out with their halters, the mules of Rebbe, did they go with them wrapped around their neck or are they pulled by them? Tashma. So we bring a brisa to answer this question. Okay, we have the following teaching. That we have another teaching where it says explicitly that the mules of Rebbe's household would go with their halters wrapped around their necks on Shabbos. Okay, so we have a couple of. So again, we just had the last teaching which says explicitly that the mules of Rebbe's household would go with their halters wrapped around their necks. Okay, now okay. Amru Rabbanan Kamed Ravasi.
So he's going with.
This goes like Rav Huna, correct. Amru Rabbanan Kamed Ravasi. The students said this teaching, this last teaching from Rabbi Shmuel bar Yehuda, the name of Chanina, about the halters of Rebbe's household, and they said it, and then they said, Had Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda lo tzricha. We actually don't need this teaching. Why? Rav Dimi nafka. We would have learned it already from Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi, again, was the teaching before, who was a little ambiguous, who just said the mules of Rebbe's household go out with halters on Shabbos, even though Rav Dimi's statement. Again, let's just review. We have the last statement we just read from Rav Shmuel, who told us that the mules of Rebbe would go out their halters wrapped around their neck. Then earlier we had a teaching of Rav Dimi, who just said they go out with halters, but didn't say whether they go out wrapped around their neck. And now the students are saying, you didn't even need that last statement, because once we had the teaching of Rav Dimi, we knew already that it was just wrapped around their neck. And they'll prove to us why in a second. You with me? This is a whiteboard scenario where we just really need a list. Okay, try to follow along. Because if you want to tell me Rav Dimi would just be talking about being pulled by their halters, we would already know that from Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Which teaching of Rav Yehuda Shmuel? Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Machlifin hayu lefnei Rebbe shelzo bezo mahu. Are the animals allowed to use a type of restraints that other animals use? In other words, you're allowed to use excessive restraints. Again, this teaching, the same teaching. My father taught Abra behemas yotzes va'afsar hasus va'pered va'gama v'chamar, that they're only allowed to use the things which would be appropriate for them. Okay, but you see from here that the mule is allowed to go out with a halter. It says explicitly, one of the animals over here is a mule going out with a halter. So you have this last teaching we just saw. Okay, now we're going to pull it together. Ready? This last teaching we just saw has Rebbe teaching us that a mule is allowed to go out with a halter. Right? So then when you have Rav Dimi's teaching telling us that Rav Dimi says that Rebbe's animals went out with a halter, it can't just be teaching us that they're allowed to go out with a halter, right? It has to be teaching me something extra. What's the extra? The halter, even though it's not being pulled, right? And so we already know from Rav Dimi that the halter, when it's not being pulled, can be used. So we don't need the last teaching of Rav Yehuda of Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, Rav Chanina, who says that they went with the halter without it being pulled. We already learned that from Rav Dimi. Following? In other words, you don't need extra statements teaching me the same thing, right? So when it says, no, Amar Ravasi, it's Trichlu. No, we do need it. Oh, why? If you would just have the last teaching, if you're reading carefully, you would see, it doesn't say that Rebbe said anything in the entire story. What's the story? The story is they came in front of Rebbe and they said, what's the halacha with extra things, whatever, allowed to, not allowed to? And then Rabbi Shmuel said in the name of his father, of Yossi, that he heard that a mule, from his father, that a mule is allowed to go out the halter. But did Rebbe say anything in the entire story? No. Rebbe was silent. Maybe it was said in front of him, but maybe he didn't accept it. Kamash Malan to Rav Dimi. And that's why you need Rav Dimi's teaching to say that Rebbe actually holds like that you only are allowed to go out with a halter. Okay? And now so Rav Dimi teaches us, Rav Dimi, if we would just have Rav Dimi, we would just learn that you're allowed to be pulled by them, but not when they're just simply wrapped around. And therefore, Kamash Malan, Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, that's why we needed the last teaching, because without it, we would not know that if it was just wrapped around, then it would be allowed to be used, and that's why we have the final teaching. With me? In other words, so now the three teachings of Rebbe is, teaching number one, it was said in front of Rebbe that a mule goes with a halter. We don't know if he holds like that. Then we have Rav Dimi who says that you go out with a halter. Teach us, he does hold like that an animal, that the mule is able to go out with a halter, only a halter. And then you have the next teaching, which says, which basically teaches us that he holds, you can't do excessive type of protection. And then you have the last teaching, which says that it was done even if it was wrapped around, meaning even if it's just for beauty purposes and not for not for carrying. Again, so the opinion of Rebbe is that he disagrees with Rav Huna. He holds you cannot do extra type of carrying, right? Extra type of protection, but he does hold if it's done for aesthetic purposes, then it's going to be okay. Okay? Now we move on to the next line in the Mishnah. Umazin aleim v'tovim mekoman. The Mishnah said that the para aduma, that the animal that has the collar on its neck, you're allowed to go ahead and immerse the animal with it on its neck, and you're allowed to sprinkle the liquid of the para aduma while it's on its neck, okay? Now, the assumption, again, so what that means that we saw yesterday is that this notion that you could tovel something while it's still on, right? If you want to tovel a bracelet, in a mikvah, you don't have to for any purposes nowadays, but if you would, you could just put it in the mikvah while it's on your hands, and that would be fine. And that's what we're learning over here. And also, if you had to sprinkle the ashes and the water of the para aduma, you could sprinkle it while it's on the person's hand. Okay? Now, the assumption in both these cases is Lamemra divnei kabule tuma ninu. Obviously, if this is coming up, that means that these collars are able to become tamei. In other words, why would you have to be tovelit? Because it's tamei. Why would you have to sprinkle the ashes of the para aduma? Because it's tamei. That's none. Didn't we learn in the Mishnah? Tabas adam tamea, that the ring of a person is capable of becoming tamei. V'tabas behema v'chelim v'shar kol tabos, but the rings of an animal or of utensils. Let's say you have a fork that has like a nice design. It has like a ring at the end of it or something like that. V'shar kol tabos and all the types of rings. Let's say you have a ring that's on your door. In other words, the rings that are on our doors usually are for knockers. That's already a purpose. But let's say it's just there for aesthetic purposes. All those things taharos, they cannot become tamei. So what's going on?
This is, you're not putting it on the actual halter thing to clarify. Why wouldn't we? You don't have to remove it to put on the animal. Is how I thought we were reading it. The animal's the one that becomes purified.
We're talking about the ring. The ring. We're talking about sprinkling the ring. We're talking about sprinkling the ring, meaning making the ring tahora. Meaning you could tovel the ring, you could tovel... Not the animal, you could not be tovel an animal. Anyways, an animal would certainly not be an animal itself would not become tamei, right? So we're talking about the halter itself, and we're questioning only a ring of a person, not a ring of an animal. Rav Yitzchak, bivai minai adam l'nai behema. We're talking about the case where the collar was used to be an adornment for a person, and then if it was given over to an animal, in other words, the person had this nice halter, and they say, you know what, I love my cow, I'm going to give it to my cow. Okay, fine. And bottom line is, at that point, so now there's a machlokas over here. The way Rashi understands is that it became tamei while it belonged to a person, and then the person gave it to an animal, so it still retains its tuma. Tosfos understands that once it was made for people and was used for people, even if it became tamei while it was already given to an animal, it still becomes tamei. One way or another, the point is that it used to be belonging to a person. That's the case we're talking about. Milo Tanya, did we not learn? We're going to bring a proof for that. Makal shel behema shel mateches mekabel tuma, that a staff of metal basically used to they hit their animals with like a stick, right? And so that staff, if it's metal, could become tamei. My time. What's the reason? Since the person used it to hit the animal, therefore it's considered a person utensil. In other words, really it's meant for the animal. But since it's used by the person, it therefore becomes an animal type of utensil. Achinami here too. Oh, did I skip? I skipped. I'm so sorry. Rav Yosef from Rav Yosef disagrees. He says, no, it wasn't that it used to belong to a person and was given to a person. Rav Yosef says, since a person carries the animal with it, therefore it's considered a human type of thing. In other words, we're not talking about a ring, a collar, which is used for aesthetic purposes. It's being used to drag the animal. So who's this for? Is it for the animal or is it for the person? Rav Yosef says it's for the person. And now we bring a proof of this. Milatani, do we not bring in a price? An animal staff of metal is able to be makabel tuma. Matam, what's the reason? Since it's used to hit the animal, even though it's for the animal, but it's also for the person. Since a person uses this ring, this choker, this whatever, the leash, the collar, to drag the animal, therefore it's considered like a human type of material, a human type of thing, and not an animal's type of ring. Have a great day.